Today I am filming an at-home squat workout. I'll be working up to sets of 270 for 3, which is going to be a little bit challenging for me, but this is only the second week of a 4-week block leading up to another 4-week block, and then I will be doing nationals. So I haven't really talked about nationals too much. If you follow me on Instagram, I'm not super active with posting. I don't post training recaps or summaries every week because I go into the gym and I really enjoy being focused on the training, and I find that if I take time to set up a tripod, I don't bring a tripod to the gym, but if I set up my camera, like I perch it on a bench or something, it just takes away from training. And because I am alone a lot of the times, I like to socialize when I go to the gym. I get to see friends. So I don't focus too much on filming, but I have found, and if I do film, it'll be at not great angles because I don't have a tripod and it's just for feedback purposes for myself. For squats, I have found I've been playing with foot placement a lot. So I generally have a very narrow stance and my feet tend to point straight forward. I've been trying to slowly move my feet out a bit because I found that as I get tired throughout my workout, I tend to spread my legs a little bit more, which probably just becomes a normal stance for someone else. So I've been trying to start off with a wider stance and see if that makes any difference, but I have found I do feel more confident with the narrow stance. So as it's getting closer to the meet, I'm starting to lose time to play around because you don't want to play around with stances going into a meet. If anything, you probably want to have a full training cycle dedicated to one stance or the other. But because my feet placement is so slightly different, I don't think it'll make a huge difference. It's not like I'm doing anything dramatic, or it's not like I'm switching high bar to low bar or conventional to sumo. It's just a couple centimeters if anything. And I've also been trying to figure out belt sizing because I am going to be cutting down a weight class pretty much because USAPL has redone its weight classes, and the one that I'm closest to is a kilo lower than I usually compete at. And I actually started off competing as a 63, cut down to a 57, and now I'm going to be a 56. So it's just 1 kilo, but when you're already kind of a small person, 1 kilo can make a huge difference. And that's something to take into consideration because when you become smaller or bigger, your leverages change. It's not necessarily for better or for worse. It just kind of depends on what your setup is like. But for me, because I do use a belt, I find that when I become smaller, my belt becomes a little bit too loose. But then if I go down a belt size or a hole on the belt, it gets too tight and then I can't breathe and brace properly, which is actually a huge part of the squat. This area and even your back and your lats play a huge role in your squat. I actually just figured out engaging your lats is important for squatting. I've been doing it subconsciously, but now that I know it can help, just as of last week, after squatting for like a decade and a half, I'm like, oh, this is something that I should be a little bit more conscious of and practice that, because of course on meet day, with the hype and the unfamiliar environment, you're not going to really take time to practice. You don't get a chance to practice all your cues. You're just kind of up there and you kind of have to, you have 1 minute to do the lift. You have to pay attention to the commands. You have to make sure your walkout is good, where you're gazing is appropriate because you won't be lifting where you usually train. So you don't really have like a spot on the floor or spot ahead of you that you can look at with your eyes. Like everything's different. So you pretty much have to have your lift perfected by the time it's meet day. So just even more things to think about, but as I've rambled on, to summarize, these are just some areas that I'm focusing on and trying to clean up my lifts in the last few weeks. And another thing I've noticed is, as far as depth goes, I think I have an easier time hitting depth when my feet are a little bit closer together. For some people that might not be the case because they may have limited ankle mobility, but I don't feel like I have a problem with a narrow stance. With the wider stance, I do just feel like I'm a little bit more comfortable with heavier weight, and bracing is a little bit easier with a wider stance, but I don't go ass to grass. And you don't have to go ass to grass. You just have to hit depth. You just have to, depending on who's judging and what angle they're at, you just have to make sure your hips are below parallel. And so I've seen judging at local meets, and it varies. Some people, from the live stream perspective I get, it doesn't look like they hit depth, but they still get white lights. So I like to make my lifts unquestionable. In all my competition lifts, I like to make sure, without a doubt, I went all the way down. Without a doubt, my butt stayed on the bench. Without a doubt, I locked out. But a part of powerlifting is how much you can lift, not how pretty your lifts look. So if your squat looks immaculate and it was like a textbook perfect squat and you hit really impressive depth, it's still the person who has the highest total wins. So, but I'm going to start warming up. So as I mentioned, these are pause squats for sets of 3. And my feet, as you can see, are pretty narrow. This is a good angle for being able to see what the entire body is doing. And you can see I'm trying to make sure I brace into my belt, trying to keep my back at a kind of a neutral position, not really arched either way. As I've noticed sometimes as I get more tired, I default into a kind of butt sticking out posteriorly position, kind of letting my upper body bend forward more. So that was a good angle to review. This one, I tried to not have the 0.5 zoom. So I tried to, but with the limited space of my tripod, it kind of cut off the butt area, so you can't really see the whole back angle, but it's enough to tell that my back isn't rounding over too much. And next we have pause squats. 4 sets of 6 at 235 is what I did that day. I showed 2 sets here. And again, you can kind of see, okay, so with these pauses, I try to pause. I try to be honest with my pausing, but I do think I could have done a better job holding a longer pause. You'll see some people put like, oh, I did pause squats or pause deadlifts, and usually the pause is really brief. I will call myself out and say, I think I could have done a little bit better with the pauses. I actually end up pausing longer towards the end of the set because I know that I'm on the last rep. My fear with pausing too long is I won't be able to stand back up. I think there is something to be said about having a spotter usually, and also not being on the 3rd floor of an apartment, because if I did fail a squat, I could gently set it on the rack, but I do fear that it would cause a vibration or sound that's undesirable for being in an apartment. But at the same time, I don't get to practice training with a spotter, so when it comes to meet day, my challenge will be knowing how to even bail out of a squat without really having the chance to practice doing so. So that's something to keep in mind, but hopefully I will not have to bail out of a squat. Thanks for watching this video, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below.
think it's way over 200. Gosh.